Well, the Jack-o'-lantern was announced, so I figured I should talk about this because this is an old weapon that I never really gave too much attention to because it's always been sort of at the bottom of the food chain. Like, it wasn't literally the worst rocket launcher in the game, but of all of the relevant slash talked about launchers that everybody kind of looked at, the Jack-o'-lantern was definitely below all of them. It was weaker than the bazooka, the dam buster, the purple dam buster, etc. But, as I always say with the 12.0 update, the Jack-o'-lantern actually got kind of a sleeper buff that barely anybody talks about. Like, did you know that this weapon is basically one of the best launchers in the game? Like, it's actually really good now. Not to mention, you have a lot of different perk choices, which we'll definitely be talking about later. Of course, before we get into that, I'd like to talk about what this weapon is and what it's about. I did get a little bit of gameplay of the audio here, where this weapon is essentially chuckling at the enemies every time it explodes, or shooting a glowing jack-o'-lantern, as you might expect. It's an old weapon, it's a fan favorite. If you have a water one, it's going to be really good against fire zones and whatnot. It's not really good for much else either, and this weapon is honestly a favorite of mine. It's always been one of the coolest weapons in the game. My early favorite was always the Gravedigger, and this weapon pairs with it perfectly. If nature enemies are going to be our main primary target in the coming update, I'm recording this a few hours beforehand, then this weapon will be a great pick for that. Or if you're just playing in nature missions in general, then maybe a Gravedigger Jack-o'-lantern combo, a little bit of classic fire weapons could be a good way to go. A lot of people think the Gravedigger is actually a really bad weapon. It's not. It's, you know, maybe a B or C tier weapon. It's not exceptional. Maybe not something you'd want to pick for a 144 player, but it's certainly going to work all the way up until like the 100 zones especially. So if you have a proper loadout and especially a good team, the Gravedigger and the Jack-o'-lantern can be a fantastic pairing. Ironically, I didn't really think of that when I was recording, so I don't have the Gravedigger on me, but you can just pretend that this Deathstalker somebody gave me is a Gravedigger. So the Jack-o'-lantern, like most rockets, is really good for crowd clearing and not so much against mist monsters. I got a lot of gameplay from this Eliminate and Collect mission where a lot of enemies were killed next to mist monsters, but I got exactly one shot that I thought was really indicative of how powerful the group damage is compared to the single target, where you can see that I just eliminate a crowd of enemies and the mist monster is barely touched. And that's what happens when you're hitting for 250,000 damage. It sounds like a lot, but in that end game, those mist monsters kind of shrug it off. And especially against the Smasher, this thing was completely useless. And my primary didn't exactly help, but it goes to say that when you're using rocket launchers, they are expensive. They are fantastic for clearing crowds. They are fantastic for eliminating the encampments, getting rid of the group amount of enemies, and then switching to your primary weapon or, you know, something that's better for continuous damage like a minigun or something. Use those against the mini bosses, the Smashers, the mist monsters, and what have you. Other than all that, I would like to say again that I'm really glad this weapon's buff. It's so cool to see this thing viable, so if you're going to be using it, how should you perk it? First and foremost, I actually want to talk about the 6 perks because I wouldn't recommend using a core reperk on it as of now. As of recording this, I only have the 1 core reperk from the last Venture season, and that took me way too much work just to be changing over the Jack-o'-lantern, but you do have a couple of options here. If, for whatever reason, you're deciding to use this weapon for impact and knockback, I would not recommend that. You can do that. And I do think the Affliction perk here is a little useless. As of recording, Affliction does abysmal damage and is essentially useless. It was doing a buffed amount of damage in one of the recent updates. I thought it was a very viable perk at that time, but it doesn't anymore. Epic decided that having a useful 6 perk was a little too good, so that's okay. They did replace it with an actually good 6 perk where you can do a 44% extra damage against nature enemies. I think that's the clear winner, and this makes a lot of sense because the only element you can get on this weapon without getting scammed is fire, so the extra damage against nature enemies is kind of a definite win there because, like I said, the Affliction is doing so little damage at the time of recording that this is basically a dead 6 perk. If that changes in the future, I'll pin a comment, I'll let you guys know what's up, but for now, that damage to nature enemies is definitely what you want. And interestingly enough, unlike most weapons that have that causes Affliction damage, there is no 45% bonus damage to Afflicted, so that's kind of interesting to note. Now, I also mentioned that this weapon has some very interesting perks. First and foremost, you have 2 crit damage perks on this, so if you are one of those absolutely insane people who likes to run a rocket launcher with totally rocking out, you can run double crit damage on this and just have a blast. I wouldn't recommend that. That's incredibly overkill, but you can do it. It's a thing that exists. And there's also another thing to note about durability, because as a lot of people might remember, rockets used to have very low durability. We're talking like 15 shots before they broke. We are out of those woods. They've replaced the cost of these rockets. Instead of them costing a ton of durability, they cost a ton of ammo. Yeah, rocket ammo doesn't come cheap. So I don't think there's any reason to run a durability perk on this. I opt for a reload speed, because yes, you can get some extra damage out of this, and there is a reason I'm running all damage. I'll explain that later on, but you definitely want to have a reload perk because it speeds things up a lot. The reload speed is essentially how fast you can fire. Reload speed is essentially synonymous with your fire rate because the fire rate is less than the reload, meaning you are limited by how fast you can get another rocket in the launcher. And I, for that reason, definitely go reload every time. Now, if you are just looking to have a ton of fun, maybe this is not your best rocket launcher, you already have the Santa's Little Helper, you already have the deatomizer, you've already got the bazooka, you've already got all these other weapons that you prefer to use, and you want to just have some actual fun and you're not just worried about damage, you can run triple reload on this. I have done this before. I highly recommend it. No, this isn't the best damage. No, there's nothing viable about this in any true sense of the way, but it is really, really fun, and if you have the reperk to spend or a friend that does and has a copy, I highly recommend doing it. I won't be doing it for today's video because I want to keep the schematic somewhat usable and I don't want to spend a ton of reperk myself, but it's super, super fun, and I'm going to leave that up to you guys to explore. Now, the reason I'm running triple damage instead of crit is something I've explained a lot in my launcher videos, but of course we're going to get into it today, and that's that when you are shooting into a crowd of enemies, yes, every single enemy has their own chance to crit. So if you shoot into a crowd of 20 enemies, if you run crit rating crit damage, on average, about 6 or 7 of them are going to be crit on. And with rockets, as I've already shown, you don't really need that extra crit damage to be eliminating the normal enemies, and like I already explained as well, the mist monsters and the mini bosses and the smashers are probably better handled by your primary weapon or an ability or something like that. It's not really something you want to be spamming a launcher at. So given those circumstances, I don't really see any reason whatsoever to run a crit build on this, save for the unique case where you're actually just using totally rocking out, in which case that's a whole different story. In a normal all-around build, I think triple damage is just the best bang for your buck. It's going to hit everything evenly and for a lot of damage, more than enough to take them out, and I don't really think a crit build makes any sense on a weapon like this. I also don't like the fact that when you're shooting a single target, every single shot you shoot is going to be rolling the dice. You're going to have like a 1/3 chance every single time. It's like flipping a coin with worse odds, and as I've already shown, you don't really need the damage. That's about all I have to say about the Jack-o'-Launcher. This thing is a fan favorite for a reason. I wish they would do more holiday-themed weapons like this. I know that they've had many, many sets come out after this, but a freaking pumpkin head on top of a Halloween-themed weapon with the Halloween date etched onto it, I love it. I love it. I love it. And if you're looking to get the Jack-o'-Launcher, as it's really, really weird, this is how you do it. You got to go to, I believe, the event people and the costume party attendees right down here. So these are only obtainable through the Fortnite Mayor's Llamas. If you're looking to get lots and lots of llamas and lots of tickets, dungeons should be out at the same time. So I'll be linking my dungeon speedrunning guide in the description below. If any changes happen in the future updates that change dungeons and make that video in any way different, I will pin a comment on that dungeon speedrun video to clarify any changes that might be relevant. But assuming all is well, you should be able to run dungeons or any normal missions even to just get as many tickets as you can to open as many Fortnite Mayor's Llamas as you can to get these different survivors. They are completely random. They are a massive hassle for some. Some people get them right away, but you do need to have one of each of these slotted and you will get exactly one copy of the Jack-o'-Launcher. That's how it's working right now. I don't know if they're going to be releasing this in the shop or making it researchable in the future. It's my understanding that you can't get this weapon any other way. You can't even use a weapon voucher on it. So it's kind of a weird thing to obtain, but once you get it, it's a really fun thing to have. That's about it though, you guys. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. Become a channel member here. Lots of nice perks. I've been saying it for a while, but it's finally here. If you go to comment on any of my videos, you should be able to use the channel emotes provided that you're a channel member. So you can finally use those fancy little things in the comments because I won't be streaming on YouTube that much anymore. Most of my streams will be over on Twitch. So if you guys want to follow me down in the description below, I'd really appreciate it. We have a fun time over there and it's a pretty cool environment. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a nice day. And then